The village of Ravenshade lay shrouded in an eternal mist, a place where time seemed to stand still and the air carried the weight of centuries. Its cobblestone streets, worn smooth by the passage of countless feet, wound like serpentine veins through the heart of the settlement, leading inexorably to the looming silhouette of Castle Draven. The castle, a monolith of weathered stone and jagged turrets, perched precariously on the edge of a cliff, its shadow stretching long and dark over the village below. It was a place of whispers, of half-remembered tales and hushed warnings, where the name of its master was spoken only in the quietest of breaths, Count Alaric von Draven. Eleanor Hartwell stood at the edge of the village square, her breath visible in the chill autumn air. She was a woman of sharp intellect and unyielding determination, her auburn hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid, her eyes a piercing green that missed nothing. In her hands, she clutched a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with cryptic notes and sketches. It had been a gift from her late mentor, Professor Alistair Grayson, a man who had dedicated his life to the study of the obscure and the unexplained. The journal spoke of a man who defied the natural order, a nobleman who had walked the earth for centuries, untouched by time or death. It spoke of Count Alaric von Draven. Eleanor's journey to Ravenshade had been spurred by a single entry in the journal, written in Grayson's spidery hand. The key to immortality lies within the walls of Castle Draven. Seek the Count, but beware. He is not what he seems. The words had ignited a fire within her, a burning curiosity that refused to be extinguished. She had spent months researching, piecing together fragments of history and folklore, until she had finally traced the Count's last known residence to this remote, forgotten village. As she stepped into the square, the villagers eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow, as though the very life had been drained from them. A child, no more than 6 years old, darted out from behind a cart, only to be snatched back by a woman with a face like weathered parchment. "Stay away from the castle," the woman hissed, her voice trembling with fear. "The Count is not to be trifled with." Eleanor's lips tightened, but she said nothing. She had heard such warnings before, in every village in town she had passed through on her way to Ravenshade. They spoke of the Count as though he were a specter, a shadow that haunted the land. But Eleanor was not one to be swayed by superstition. She was a woman of science, of reason, and she would not be deterred by the fears of simple folk. The path to Castle Draven was steep and treacherous, the ground slick with fallen leaves and damp moss. As she climbed, the mist thickened, wrapping around her like a shroud. The castle loomed ever larger, its dark windows staring down at her like the eyes of some great beast. The air grew colder, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional cry of a raven perched high above. At last, she reached the castle gates, their iron bars twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. She reached out to touch the cold metal, and a shiver ran down her spine. The gates creaked open of their own accord, as though the castle itself had been expecting her. The courtyard beyond was overgrown with weeds, the statues that lined the path cracked and crumbling. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the silence was deafening. Eleanor's footsteps echoed loudly as she approached the massive oak doors, their surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story she could not quite decipher. Before she could knock, the doors swung open, revealing a man who seemed to have stepped out of another era. He was tall and gaunt, his face pale and angular, with eyes that burned like embers in the dim light. His hair, black as midnight, fell in loose waves to his shoulders, and he was dressed in a coat of deep crimson, the fabric rich and heavy. He regarded her with a mixture of amusement and curiosity, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You are either very brave or very foolish to come here," he said, his voice smooth and velvety with an accent that hinted at a time long past. "Few dare to seek out the Count of Ravenshade." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I am neither brave nor foolish," she replied, her voice steady. "I am Eleanor Hartwell, a historian. I have come to speak with Count Alaric von Draven." The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. "Then you have found him," he said, stepping aside to allow her entry. "Welcome to Castle Draven, Miss Hartwell. I trust you will find your visit enlightening." The interior of the castle was a labyrinth of shadowed corridors and grand halls, the walls lined with portraits of men and women who bore a striking resemblance to the Count. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, and the only sound was the soft rustle of the Count's coat as he led her deeper into the heart of the castle. They entered a vast library, its shelves reaching high into the vaulted ceiling, filled with books and scrolls that seemed to span the ages. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The Count gestured for her to sit, and she did so, her eyes never leaving his. "You have come seeking answers," he said, his tone conversational as though they were discussing the weather. "But tell me, Miss Hartwell, what makes you think I will give them to you?" Eleanor opened the journal and placed it on the table between them. "This belonged to my mentor, Professor Alistair Grayson. He believed you held the key to immortality. He believed you were different." The Count's eyes flicked to the journal, and for a moment his expression darkened. "Grayson," he murmured almost to himself. "A clever man, but too curious for his own good. Tell me, Miss Hartwell, do you share his curiosity?" "I do," she replied without hesitation. "But I also share his determination. I will uncover the truth, with or without your help." The Count leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And what if the truth is more than you can bear? What if it changes everything you think you know about the world?" Eleanor's gaze did not waver. "Then I will bear it. I am not afraid of the truth." The Count studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well, Miss Hartwell, I will tell you what I can, but be warned. Once you know, there is no turning back." As the Count began to speak, his voice low and hypnotic, Eleanor felt a thrill of anticipation. She was on the brink of something extraordinary, something that would change her life forever. But even as she listened, a part of her wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. For in the flickering firelight, the Count's shadow seemed to stretch and twist, taking on a life of its own. And somewhere deep within the castle, a clock began to chime, its tolling echoing through the halls like a funeral dirge. The fire in the library's hearth had burned low, its embers casting a faint, ruddy glow that danced across the Count's face as he spoke. His voice was a low, resonant timbre, weaving a tapestry of words that seemed to pull Eleanor deeper into the shadows of his past. She sat transfixed, her hands gripping the arms of her chair, her mind racing to keep pace with the revelations spilling from his lips. "Immortality," the Count began, his eyes distant as though gazing into a time long forgotten, "is not the gift many believe it to be. It is a curse, a chain that binds one to the earth, forcing them to watch as all they love withers and fades. I have seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth and death of countless souls, and yet I remain, unchanging, eternal." Eleanor leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "How?" she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How is it possible?" The Count's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. It began in the year 1487, in a time when the world was steeped in superstition and fear. I was a young nobleman then, ambitious and reckless, with a thirst for knowledge that knew no bounds. It was this thirst that led me to the alchemist, Dr. Elias Thorne. At the mention of the name, Eleanor's breath caught. She had seen it before, scrawled in the margins of her mentor's journal, accompanied by cryptic notes and warnings. "Thorne," she repeated, her voice trembling with excitement. "What did he do to you?" The Count's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing, as though recalling a memory long buried. Thorne was a man of unparalleled genius, but his mind was twisted, his soul corrupted by his obsession with eternal life. He claimed to have discovered the secret to immortality, a secret hidden within an ancient artifact known as the Eterna Amulet. I was foolish enough to believe him. Eleanor's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and possibilities. "The amulet," she pressed, her voice urgent. "What is it? Where did it come from?" The Count rose from his chair, his movements fluid and deliberate, and crossed to a large, ornate cabinet that stood against the far wall. He opened it with a key that hung from a chain around his neck, revealing a small, intricately carved box. He lifted it with reverence, his fingers trembling slightly as he carried it back to the table. "He said, placing the box before her, "is the Eterna Amulet. It is said to have been forged by a civilization long lost to history, a people who possessed knowledge far beyond our own. Thorn believed it to be the key to unlocking the secrets of life and death. Eleanor's eyes widened as the Count opened the box, revealing the amulet within. It was a thing of breathtaking beauty, its surface gleaming with an otherworldly light. The centerpiece was a large blood-red gem, surrounded by intricate patterns of gold and silver that seemed to shift and shimmer as though alive. But there was something else, something dark and unsettling that emanated from the amulet, a sense of malevolence that made her skin crawl. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice tinged with awe and unease. "Beautiful, yes," the Count agreed, his tone grim but deadly. "Thorn used it to perform a ritual that bound my soul to the amulet, granting me eternal life. But there was a price, a terrible price." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "What price?" The Count's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of pain, of regret. "The amulet does not grant immortality freely," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "It demands a sacrifice, a soul for a soul. To sustain my life, I must take the lives of others, consuming their essence to fuel my own." Eleanor recoiled, her stomach churning with horror. "You? You kill people?" The Count's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "I have no choice," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "If I do not feed the amulet, it will consume me instead, trapping my soul in an eternity of torment. I am a prisoner, Miss Hartwell, bound by chains of my own making." The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening as though the very walls were closing in. Eleanor's mind raced, struggling to reconcile the man before her with the monster he claimed to be. She wanted to deny it, to dismiss his words as the ravings of a madman, but the truth was there, staring her in the face, undeniable and inescapable. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why now?" The Count's gaze softened, and for a moment he looked almost human. "Because you remind me of someone I once knew," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Someone who believed in me, who saw the man beneath the monster. Her name was Isabella Montclair." Eleanor's breath caught at the name. It was one she had seen before, written in the journal alongside a sketch of a beautiful woman with haunting eyes. "Isabella," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who was she?" The Count's eyes grew distant, his expression one of profound sorrow. "She was my greatest love," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and my greatest regret. I thought I could protect her, that I could shield her from the darkness that surrounds me. But I was wrong." Eleanor's heart ached at the pain in his voice, but her curiosity burned brighter than ever. "What happened to her?" The Count's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "She discovered the truth," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She learned of the amulet, of the lives I had taken to sustain my own. She begged me to destroy it, to free myself from its curse, but I was too weak, too afraid, and so she took matters into her own hands." Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. "She tried to destroy the amulet?" The Count nodded, his expression one of profound grief. "She believed that by destroying it she could save me. But the amulet is not so easily destroyed. It fought back, and in the end, it claimed her life. Her soul was consumed, her essence trapped within the amulet, forever bound to me." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she listened, her heart breaking for the woman who had loved the Count so deeply, only to be destroyed by his curse. "Is that why you've been searching for a way to break the curse?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To free her?" The Count's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a glimmer of hope. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I have spent centuries searching for a way to undo what I have done, to free Isabella and myself from this eternal torment. But the amulet is powerful, and its secrets are well guarded." Eleanor's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. "What if I could help you?" she asked, her voice filled with resolve. "What if together we could find a way to break the curse?" The Count's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment he looked almost hopeful. But then his expression darkened and he shook his head. "You do not know what you are asking," he said, his voice heavy with warning. "The amulet is dangerous, and those who seek to destroy it often meet a grim fate. I cannot ask you to risk your life for me." Eleanor rose from her chair, her eyes blazing with determination. "You're not asking," she said, her voice firm. "I'm offering. I've spent my life searching for the truth, and now that I've found it, I can't turn away. I won't." The Count studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "But know this, Miss Hartwell, the path we tread is a dangerous one, and there is no turning back." As the Count's words hung in the air, Eleanor felt a thrill of anticipation mingled with a deep, unshakable fear. She was stepping into the unknown, into a world of darkness and danger, where the line between life and death was blurred, and the stakes were higher than she could possibly imagine. But she was not afraid. She was ready. And somewhere, deep within the castle, the clock began to chime once more, its tolling echoing through the halls like a harbinger of doom. The castle was alive with whispers, the kind that slithered through the cracks in the stone walls and coiled around the mind like serpents. Eleanor could feel them, faint and insidious, as she followed the Count through the labyrinthine corridors of Castle Draven. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient wood, and the flickering torchlight cast grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. She clutched the journal tightly to her chest, its weight a constant reminder of the perilous path she had chosen. The Count moved ahead of her, his crimson coat a splash of color against the oppressive gloom, his presence both a comfort and a warning. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to plunge into the very bowels of the earth, each step echoing like a death knell. The air grew colder, the darkness denser, until they reached a heavy iron door adorned with intricate carvings of writhing figures and arcane symbols. The Count paused, his hand hovering over the door's handle, his expression unreadable. "What lies beyond this door," he said, his voice low and grave, "is not for the faint of heart. Once you see it, there is no unseeing. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but she nodded, her resolve unshaken. "I'm certain." The Count's eyes bore into hers, searching for any trace of doubt. Finding none, he turned the handle, and the door creaked open with a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Beyond lay a chamber unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars of strange, glowing liquids, their contents swirling with an eerie luminescence. In the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly with a dark, malevolent energy. And above it, suspended in midair by some unseen force, was the Eterna Amulet, its blood-red gem glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce the very soul. Eleanor stepped into the chamber, her breath catching in her throat. The air was electric, charged with a power that made her skin prickle. She could feel the amulet's presence, a weight pressing down on her chest, a whisper in her mind that she could not quite decipher. "This is where it began," the Count said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "This is where Thorn performed the ritual that bound me to the amulet, and this is where it must end." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "How do we destroy it?" The Count's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "The amulet is not easily destroyed. It is a thing of immense power, and it will fight to preserve itself. But there is a way, a ritual, one that requires a sacrifice greater than any other." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. What kind of sacrifice? The Count's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker of hesitation. "The ritual requires the life of the one who wields the amulet," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "To destroy it, I must die." Eleanor's breath caught, her mind reeling. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There must be another way." The Count shook his head, his expression resolute. "There is no other way. The amulet's power is tied to my life force. To destroy it, I must sever that connection, and the only way to do that is to end my existence." Eleanor's heart ached with a pain she could not fully comprehend. She had come seeking answers, seeking the truth, but she had never imagined it would come to this. "I can't let you do this," she said, her voice breaking. "There has to be another way." The Count's gaze softened and he reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have given me something I thought I had lost forever," he said, his voice filled with a quiet gratitude. "Hope. But this is the only way to end the cycle of death and despair that I have wrought. I cannot ask you to understand, but I can ask you to help me." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but she nodded, her resolve hardening. "What do I need to do?" The Count stepped back, his expression one of grim determination. "The ritual requires 3 things: the amulet, the blood of the one who wields it, and the will to let go. You must be the one to perform the ritual, to speak the words that will sever the connection. But be warned, the amulet will not go quietly. It will fight back, and it will use every means at its disposal to stop you." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but she nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I'll do it." The Count's eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow, and he stepped forward, pressing a small, ornate dagger into her hands. "When the time comes, you must strike true," he said, his voice filled with a quiet urgency. "Do not hesitate." Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the dagger, its weight heavy with the burden of what she must do. She looked up at the Count, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I won't fail you." The Count nodded, his expression one of quiet acceptance. "Then let us begin." He stepped to the altar, his movements deliberate and unhurried, and placed his hand on the amulet. The moment his skin touched the gem, the chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. The amulet's power surged, a wave of energy that knocked Eleanor off her feet and sent her sprawling to the ground. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw the Count standing at the center of the maelstrom, his body racked with pain as the amulet's power coursed through him. "Now!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the amulet's power. "Do it now!" Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped the dagger, her mind racing with fear and doubt, but she knew there was no turning back. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest, and raised the dagger high. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow, and then, with a cry of anguish, she plunged the dagger into the Count's chest. The chamber was filled with a deafening silence as the Count's body slumped to the ground, his blood pooling around him. The amulet's light flickered and dimmed, its power waning as the connection was severed. And then, with a final blinding flash, it shattered, its fragments scattering across the chamber like shards of glass. Eleanor fell to her knees, her body racked with sobs, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. She had come seeking the truth, and she had found it, but at a cost greater than she could have ever imagined. And as the chamber fell into darkness, the whispers that had haunted the castle faded into silence, leaving only the echoes of a life that had been lived too long and a soul that had finally found peace.